Welcome to your deep dive. Ever bombed a coding interview, even when you knew your stuff? Today could be a game changer. We're diving into the idea that actually talking through your code can make you a better coder, especially when someone's watching.
It sounds a little odd, right? You're hired for your code, not your chatter. But this AlgoCademy article, Thinking Out Loud, makes a compelling case.
I'm already hooked. Hit me with the why.
Imagine this. You're in the hot seat, whiteboard or shared editor, the pressure's on. Going silent feels natural, but it's a trap.
Okay, been there, felt that panic. But how does talking help? Isn't it distracting?
It's about showing, not just knowing. Take reversing a string. A simple problem, but tons of ways to solve it. If you only code silently, they see the end result, not the journey.
So like two people could solve it, one's elegant, the other one's clunky, but the output's the same on screen.
Exactly. Now imagine one candidate explaining, I'll use a two-pointer approach here for efficiency, but I considered X, which is simpler but less space efficient. They're demonstrating deep understanding, not just rote memorization.
That's huge EE. It's like you might not even write the most optimal code on the spot, but if you can talk through the trade-offs, that's gold.
Absolutely. It turns a test into a conversation. They see how you think, not just what you've memorized.
Makes the interviewer's job easier too, right? Instead of guessing, they're along for the ride.
And more importantly, it helps you. Ever notice how explaining a bug to someone often makes you spot the solution?
All the time. It's like the act of talking it through debugs your brain.
Precisely. Now let's get practical. The article breaks down actionable steps.
Okay, let's unpack those. Where do we start?
Start by restating the problem in your own words. It seems basic, but it ensures you understand the task and gives you a moment to breathe.
So if they say, write a function to find the largest number in an array, I shouldn't just dive in.
Right. You could say, okay, so I need to find the maximum value within this array. Are there any constraints on the array size or data types? This shows you're paying attention to detail, and it might even reveal information you wouldn't have considered otherwise.
Okay, I'm seeing how that sets the stage, but then we actually have to, solve the problem. Where does the talking come in while you're actually writing the code?
It's about narrating your thought process every step of the way. Imagine you're a sports commentator, but for code. Instead of saying, and here's a for loop, you'd say,
All right, folks, we're entering a for loop here, iterating through this array to find our max value. Each element we check, we're going to compare it to the current max.
see, you're not just coding, you're explaining, justifying your choices.
So even if I know time-space complexity is important, I should say it out loud.
100%. For our max value example, you could say, this runs in ON time, because in the worst case, we look at every element once. Space complexity is O1 because we're just using a couple of variables.
For those listening who might be newer to those terms, time complexity is basically how the runtime scales with the input size, and space complexity is how much extra memory you're using.
Thanks for clarifying that. Now let's talk edge cases. This is where thinking out loud really shines.
Right, those weird inputs that break everything. What if the array is empty or has duplicates?
Exactly. By bringing them up, you're demonstrating foresight. You might say, before I jump into the code, I want to consider a few edge cases. What if the array is empty? Should we return null, throw an error, or...
So I don't even necessarily need the solution right away, but just showing I'm thinking about it is valuable.
Precisely. It proves you're not just coding in a vacuum. You're thinking about real-world scenarios, potential issues, and that's what separates good coders from great ones.
Okay, this is making me rethink my whole approach. It's like before I'd worry about writing the most brilliant code in silence, but now it's about being the most articulate coder in the room.
And don't forget, this isn't just about impressing interviewers. It's a skill that pays off throughout your career. Imagine debugging with a colleague, pair programming. Being able to articulate your code is invaluable.
It's like even when you're not actively interviewing, you're essentially always auditioning for your next role or promotion, and clear communication is key. But I have to admit it feels weird to talk to myself while coding. Any tips for practicing?
It does feel strange at first, but it gets easier. Start by simply talking through your thought process, even if it's just muttering to yourself. You can even rubber duck it, explain your code to an inanimate object.
I have a feeling my rubber duck is about to hear way more about sorting algorithms than it ever signed up for.
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
Another great practice method is recording yourself while you code. This allows you to go back and analyze your verbal explanations, identify areas for improvement, and get comfortable with the sound of your own voice.
I can see how that would be helpful. It's like watching game footage to improve your technique. But what about when you're truly stuck? Is it better to stay silent and think or keep talking even if you're not making progress?
This is a common concern, but the article is clear.
Yeah.
Never go silent when you're stuck. Instead, verbalize your thought process, even if it's messy.
So instead of that awkward silence, I should be saying things like, "Okay, I'm a bit lost here. I was expecting X to happen, but instead I'm getting Y. Let's see what could be causing this."
You got it. This demonstrates that you can remain calm and analytical under pressure, a highly sought-after trait in any developer.
Makes sense. It shows you're not afraid to admit when you don't know something, which is crucial for learning and growth. Plus, the interviewer might even offer a helpful hint.
Absolutely. Remember, they want to see you succeed. And sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective or a slightly different approach to unlock the solution.
So even getting stuck can be an opportunity to showcase your problem-solving skills. I love that reframing.
It's all about perspective. And remember, this thinking out loud approach, it isn't just for coding interviews. It's a valuable skill for pair programming, code reviews, and even just debugging your own code.
It's about making your thought process transparent, which ultimately leads to better code and a more collaborative work environment. Now, the article primarily focuses on in-person interviews, but what about those take-home coding challenges?
Sure.
Do the same principles apply?
They absolutely do. And it's something we probably don't do enough, even when we're not, in that interview mode.
Right. Like it's tempting to just crank out the code in silence, but even when it's a take-home, think of it as thinking out loud, but for your future self.
Ooh, I like that for future self. Because when I look back at code I wrote a month ago, it's like deciphering ancient hieroglyphs. Exactly. So comment your code like you're explaining it to someone else. Not just what each line does, but why you chose that approach. If you considered alternatives, mention that too.
Yeah.
It shows depth of thought.
So even if no one sees those comments but me in 6 months, it's valuable documentation.
Precisely. And if the take-home leads to a follow-up interview, like you've got talking points ready, you can literally say, as I noted in my code, and sound super prepared.
Now that is clever. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground, the why, the what, the how of this whole thinking out loud thing. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners about acing those coding interviews?
Two things. One, remember it's a conversation, not a monologue. Don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions, bounce ideas off the interviewer, even admit when you need a minute to think.
Because nobody expects you to be a code generating robot with zero need for input, right?
Exactly. And two, even if you totally bomb the coding part, don't give up. If you've been thinking out loud the whole time, they've seen how you approach problems, your thought process, your willingness to learn. Those are invaluable qualities in a candidate.
It's like even if the code isn't, perfect, the way you talk about it can still leave a really strong impression.
100%. So embrace the awkwardness, practice talking through your code, and remember, you got this.
This has been an amazing deep dive into a skill that's so much more than just, acing interviews, right? It's about becoming a better communicator, collaborator, and all-around awesome coder.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and your code talking.